Hello, my name is Ashton Jackson, and today I will be reviewing Dissolving Classroom by Junji Ito. Um, the comic was both written and illustrated by Junji Ito himself, since he is a mangaka, and typically mangakas draw and write their stories or their manga. Um, Very rarely do they have someone write it and another person draw it. But yeah, it was published. Dissolving Classrooms was published in Japan by Akira Publishing, but here in the U.S. it was published by Vertical Comics. It's about 78 pages long, and it's comprised of 8 short stories, which allows it to be considered a compilation. But the story does follow the standard 3-act structure, with Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Act 1, the beginning, Act 2, the middle, and Act 3, the end. And each short story is about 40 pages long, which makes each act about, Act 1, 10 pages, Act 2, about 20 pages, and Act 3, 10 pages as well. But Dissolving Classroom follows the story of a young man who goes by the name of Yuma Aizawa, and he's a shy young man, and he's a new student at Hikage Prefectural High School in Japan. Right away, we learn his character flaw. He apologizes too much for no reason at all. Sometimes he'll just apologize for apologizing, and then but we learn in Act 1 that by being very apologetic, Yuma is bullied, and the only nice person to him is a girl named Kaiko, who is right here seen watching Yuma get bullied. She steps in eventually and calls for them to stop bullying him, but she's really the only nice person to Yuma. Later on in the story, Kaiko gets followed by a strange girl named Shizumi, and this strange girl, she terrorizes her and screams out brains, brains, brains. Here she can be found, Shizumi, right here, and she's terrorizing Kaiko, which causes Kaiko to flee from her because, of course, like any person with sound mind is afraid of a weird, creepy child with raccoon eyes staring at them menacingly. So, by running from from Shizumi, Kaiko is struck by a truck. She is in the hospital for a while, and we learn that during her time being in the hospital, Yuma has been apologizing to her parents and Kaiko. Now, we learn that later, as Kaiko and Yuma grow closer, we learn that we learn from Yuma that the little girl Shizumi that caused Kaiko to get struck by the bus is in fact his child sister. Now, he tells Kaiko that his little sister was born troubled and she terrorizes everyone and she's a weird child. Kaiko, after falling for Yuma and his, I guess you would consider, charm, she wants to help Kaiko change her ways. So she takes it upon herself. Yuma warns her no, but she doesn't listen. So she goes to Yuma's house. She sees Kaiko. Kaiko is still strange, yet she sees Shizumi, and Shizumi tells Kaiko a little story that why Yuma apologizes so much is that he worships the devil or praises the devil. At first, Kaiko doesn't believe Shizumi, and but she ends up finding in their home the head of their parents. parents. Of course, she first, upon entering the apartment, she smells an awful stench. This is what comes to be found: the head of their parents. Kayako doesn't believe this. She runs. She she speaks to Yuma. Yuma, he's apologizing again and again and again. After learning that Yuma apologizes, but not to the people that he troubles or Shizumi troubles, he is actually apologizing to the devil himself, and through that apology, Shizumi calls it an evil electromagnetic that passes between Yuma and the devil, and in between it goes through the person and causes their brain to turn into mush or to melt. So after hearing this, Kayako, she's very reluctant and to hear any more apologies from Yuma. But Shizume is not without fault. She actually enjoys terrorizing people so that Yuma can apologize to them, so that their brain can turn into mush, so that she can devour that mush. So eventually, everyone does dissolve and turn into a liquid besides Kayako, because she passes out and the apology does not reach her brain. I guess you have to be conscious for it to affect you. But eventually, majority of the students at Hikage High School is turned into mush. Now, in the ending, we just see Kayako in the hospital, and she has brain damage. She's paralyzed. She can't speak. She can't do anything really. She has brain damage from her brain beginning to melt. So then the story ends with a cliffhanger, and it goes on into the next story, which is called Dissolving Beauty. In this story, he does the same thing, except, he causes people to change, but except he praises their beauty, or the woman's beauty, and causes her face to change and her to get horrendous and whatnot. They become ugly through the same electromagnetic wave, the evil electromagnetic wave. But it's pretty much a cliffhanger at the end of the story that leads to the next story and the next and the next, until eventually all the stories are completed and we get to the last story where Yuma eventually gets on air through his fame of having people dissolve and whatnot. He's a wanted person, and through rumored to have these people dissolve. Eventually he gets on air, he broadcasts his apology to the entire world, and eventually everyone is turned into mush, or everyone melts. Therefore, dissolving world, I would call it. But are there any changes in the story? I would say yes, because in the beginning, Yuma, he's a shy person. Of course, this is his facade, but even around people, he's more quiet. But then he becomes more aggressive in his actions to get approval from the devil, like from the first story, Dissolving Classroom. He's less aggressive. He's just more apologizing. That's it. He lets things come to him. Come Dissolving Beauty, the second story, he's more seeking out. And this is like a few years later. He's seeking out women to call them beautiful. Then we get a backstory, and then we get him actually seeking out to get apologies from people, and so that they can dissolve. But he still has that facade that he's an innocent person, and his sister Shizumi is the troubled one. But Kayako does change as well. She, despite being paralyzed and brain damage, she actually speaks a little bit, and she actually is more aggressive at trying to find Yuma so that she could stop him. Of course, she fails at the end because she is not the protagonist. Yuma is. She eventually, like the rest of the world, gets turned into mush, or melts, whatever you want to call it. So that character, the portion of that character development for both characters is that Yuma is more aggressive. Kaiko becomes more aggressive as well, despite being more unwilling to be, unable to be aggressive for her physical disability. Then, but in regard to the transitioning of the story, it's very well drawn. According to Scott McCloud's transitioning, I would say that Junji Ito follows mostly moment by moment transitions and action by action transitions, as you can tell. Since we're reading from right to left instead of left to right, this is a moment, and it goes to another moment. The same woman, just a different perspective or action. It can be considered either or. There's different actions going on in each one, or moment. Moments are more subtle, actions are more abrupt, so I would say it follows more of action. But he does this throughout the story in every panel. It doesn't really change. He really goes moment to moment, moment to moment, moment to moment. There's nothing really different about that. But the transitions at the end of the panel that keeps the story going, since it leads the reader in the Z pattern, of course, with the dialogue, the Z pattern, but it also leads them to the next panel. In the next page, each panel will lead to the next page. She's looking, and that's what she sees. Down here, she's looking, and she sees this, and you can still see her. So, the transitioning is, in my opinion, I like it. It's a page turner. It keeps me interested. There's not really any dull moments. There's not lengthy dialogue that bores me. There's a lot of graphic material in here that makes me want to see the next panel, makes me want to see the characters' reactions, makes me want to see what happens next. The explanations are beautifully drawn. They're not just explained through the dialogue and lengthy. They're short, concise, and they complement the actual artwork. So that's why it was easy for me to finish this book in one day. I read it again after that, and it was very easy to follow. I wouldn't consider certain pages a mini comic. That's because I've read the entire story, but if I look at a single page, I can see this as a mini comic. A guy attacks a woman. By the end, it's implied that either she's going to get stabbed, we don't know. But I could conclude on this and feel pretty satisfied, like, oh, that's an interesting page. I kind of want to know more, but yeah. But it works better as a whole, and I would recommend picking up this book, especially for people who are into horror genre. I've never been a real fan of horror, but I like sci-fi horror, if that makes sense. Things like Aliens, also Predator, things of that nature, where it's interesting, where it takes a scientific type of horrific truths. Also anime like Fullmetal Alchemist, where it's fiction, can be considered science fiction. It also can be considered a horror, because there's a lot of horrific things that happen. There's a lot of gore in that. This is similar to that, except there's less of a scientific explanation to it. It's more like it's evil electromagnetic energy can pass between this person and that one. It reminds me of like a microwave or something, that the waves enter into the object and kind of distorts the material, the matter, I guess. In that way, it can be a little bit considered scientific, but it's like a sci-fi to me. And Junji, he does a lot of sci-fi works, like Uzumaki, which not Uzumaki, but like Akira. Well, that's not his work, but But I would consider this a good read. I would consider it to my fellow classmates to pick it up, try it out, read it. It's a page turner. You won't get bored. In my opinion, I didn't get bored. I would recommend it to friends as well. My friends are really into like shonen type anime or action type comics, like Avengers and Marvel type comics, and anime like Naruto. But for those of you who like a little horror in your mix, this is a good thing. It's not too horrific. It's not too gory. It's the perfect mix. So I would recommend it for both my classmates and my friends. It's well written for my classmates. You all are writers just like myself, so there's some well written comic for you, and you could probably use that as an example if you want to become a comic book artist. As a fun fact, I would say that Junji Ito wrote at the very end. This is not part of the story. It's like kind of a bonus chapter, bonus page, where it says that Yuma Aizawa, the protagonist in the story, is actually played by an actor, a fictional actor named Jidoi Yamada. I'll show you the picture right here. Here he is. He's a supposed actor, and I guess they went a great lengths to explain that this is fiction. I would assume because how gory it is, it can be in reference to some things that are real, and people could assume that it was inspired by a few things. I would assume I know of a real life event where it's similar to this, where a person's body dissolved like that and it leaked into the next apartment, and it was horrific according to the witnesses, and I guess they would have to use that as a disclaimer that this is fictional, not inspired by anything true. But I guess Junji Ito wanted to add that even his fictional character is played by an actual character. So Yuma Aizawa is played by an actor named Jidoi Yamada, but his sister Shizumi plays herself, so she's the real one. But I give this book a 9 out of 10, not that anyone asked, but I very much enjoyed it. I look forward to reading more from Junji Ito, and yeah, I drew some inspiration from this, and I want to include it in some of my stories as well. But thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.